My name is Priya Chandran. I'm 38. 11 days ago, I stood in the hallway of a hospital's cardiac care unit, holding a laminated card in my hand that named me, in my mother's own handwriting and my mother's own signature, as the person legally authorized to make her medical decisions if she ever couldn't make them herself. And I stood there while a nurse told me, gently, that those decisions had already been made. By my brother. Who had arrived 40 minutes before me. Who had told the attending physician that I was unreachable. Who had signed paperwork, using a document I had never seen before that afternoon, overriding a designation my mother had made 4 years earlier with the specific deliberate care of a woman who did not make important decisions lightly. Before I tell you what was in that room, and what I found out about the document my brother produced, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Only if this is landing somewhere real. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I read every single one. Now let me take you back to where this started, because you need to understand my mother, and you need to understand why she chose me specifically, before you can understand the size of what was taken from both of us that afternoon. My mother is Lakshmi Chandran. She's 67. 4 years ago, she sat me down at her kitchen table, the same table she has had since I was a child, laminate top, chrome legs, the kind of table that has survived 3 decades of dinners and homework and, eventually, the specific conversations that mothers and adult daughters have when a mother has started thinking seriously about her own mortality. She had just been diagnosed with the heart condition that put her in the hospital 11 days ago, an arrhythmia with a specific risk profile her cardiologist had explained to her carefully, the kind of diagnosis that does not announce a timeline but does introduce the possibility of sudden, serious events, the kind of diagnosis that makes a careful woman start putting her affairs in order while she still has the clarity to do it herself. She told me she wanted to designate a healthcare proxy. I want to tell you exactly how that conversation went, because the specificity of it matters enormously to what happened 11 days ago. She said, "Priya, I need to ask you something, and I need you to actually think about it before you answer, not just say yes because you think that's what a good daughter says." I said, "Okay." She said, "If something happens to me, and I can't speak for myself, I need someone who will make the decisions I would actually want made, not the decisions that feel easiest to make in the moment, not the decisions your brother might make out of panic or out of his own fear of losing me. I need someone who has actually listened to me talk about what I want, over the years, and who will hold to that even when it's hard." I said, "And you want that to be me?" She said, "I do." She said, "I've thought about this for weeks. Your brother loves me. I know that. But your brother has never once, in 30 years, asked me a single question about what I'd want if I were dying. You have. You asked me when Grandma was in the hospital. You asked me again last year when my friend Kavita passed. You are the one who actually wants to know, and I trust the wanting to know more than I trust the love, because love without the wanting to know can still get it wrong." Went to an attorney together the following week. A careful man named Robert Ellison who specializes in elder law and advance directives, who walked my mother through the specific legal mechanics of a healthcare power of attorney, explaining that it needed to be in writing, signed, and in the state where we live, either notarized or witnessed by 2 people who were not the designated agent and not relatives who would benefit financially from her estate. My mother chose the notarization route, deliberately, she told me afterward, because she wanted the document to have the specific weight of something official rather than something that could later be characterized as informal or ambiguous. The document named me, Priya Chandran, as her healthcare agent, with full authority to make medical decisions on her behalf if she became unable to make them herself. It named my brother, Raj Chandran, as the alternate agent, meaning he would only have authority if I were unavailable, unreachable, or unwilling to serve. My mother was explicit about this hierarchy, both in the document and in a private conversation with Raj that I did not witness but that she told me about afterward, in the specific plain language she used for hard conversations. She told me she sat Raj down separately and said, "Raj, I need you to know I've named your sister as my primary healthcare agent. I need you to understand that this isn't about not trusting you. It's about the fact that Priya and I have had specific conversations about what I want, conversations you and I haven't had in the same way, and I need someone in that role who already knows the answers rather than someone who would have to guess at them during the worst moment of our lives." Asked my mother, at the time, how Raj had reacted. She said he understood. She said he didn't seem thrilled about it, but he said the right things. I want you to hold on to that detail, because I think, looking back now, it was the first small crack in a foundation that took 4 years to fully give way. I need to tell you about Raj, because he is not a villain in the way that word tends to flatten people in stories like this. He's 35. He's my only sibling. We grew up close, in the specific way that siblings 4 years apart often are, him looking up to me through childhood, me looking out for him in the ways an older sister does without necessarily thinking of it as a role, just as an instinct. He has always loved our mother enormously, in a large, demonstrative way, the kind of love that shows up in gestures, in expensive gifts for her birthday, in showing up at family events with flowers, in the specific performance of devotion that people who love loudly often produce. What Raj has never been particularly good at is the quieter, harder work of actually asking our mother questions about herself, about what she wants, about the interior of her actual thoughts and fears, as opposed to loving the version of her that exists in his mind, a version built more from his own need for her than from careful attention to who she actually is. I don't say this to condemn him. I say it because I think it is the single most important fact for understanding what he did 11 days ago, and why he did it, and why I do not believe, even now, that he did it out of malice, and why Mother was rushed to the hospital 11 days ago, on a Tuesday, after her arrhythmia produced a cardiac event severe enough that a coworker at the community center where she volunteers called an ambulance. I was at work, 40 minutes away, in a meeting with my phone on silent, a decision I have replayed in my mind more times than I can count in the days since, wondering if 30 minutes of difference would have changed anything. Raj was closer. He works from home, 15 minutes from the hospital, and he got the call from the ambulance dispatch, listed as an emergency contact, before I had even come out of my meeting and seen the 6 missed calls stacking up on my screen. By the time I arrived at the hospital, 52 minutes after the first missed call, Raj had already been there for 40 minutes. My mother was stable but unconscious, sedated for a procedure the medical team needed to perform, and unable, in that specific window, to make or communicate decisions about her own care. Which meant that in that window, the healthcare proxy document mattered more than it had ever mattered in the 4 years since we signed it. Walked into the cardiac care unit and found Raj in the hallway, speaking with a physician I didn't recognize, and something in his posture, the specific defensive angle of his shoulders when he saw me approaching, told me before either of them said a word that something had already happened that I was not going to like. The physician, a woman named Dr. Alvarez, turned to me and said, "Are you, Priya?" I said yes. She said, "I understand there's some confusion about who's authorized to make decisions for your mother right now." I said, "I'm her healthcare proxy. I have the document in my bag." She said, "Your brother provided a document as well, about 40 minutes ago, when we needed a decision made quickly about a procedure, and at the time, he told us you were unreachable. I want you to sit with that sentence the way I sat with it in that hallway. He told us you were unreachable." I had 6 missed calls on my phone from the hospital's number and from Raj himself, none of which I had seen because my phone was on silent in a meeting, which is a true and understandable gap in communication. What was not true, what could not have been true, was the specific claim that I was unreachable in some more permanent sense, a claim that implied Raj had exhausted reasonable efforts to reach me and concluded, correctly, that the situation required someone else to step in. He had called me twice. He had waited perhaps 6 minutes between his first attempt and his decision to present himself, instead, as the appropriate decision-maker. I said, "What document did he provide?" Dr. Alvarez said he presented what he described as an updated healthcare directive, naming him as the primary agent. I felt something in my chest go very cold and very still. I said, "That document does not exist. My mother's healthcare proxy names me as the primary agent and Raj as the alternate. There has been no updated version." Dr. Alvarez's expression shifted, the specific careful recalibration of a physician realizing that a decision made 40 minutes earlier may have been made on the basis of inaccurate information, a realization that carries its own weight of institutional liability alongside the human weight of the situation. It turned to Raj. I said, "What document did you show them?" He would not look at me directly at first. Then he said, "Priya," I panicked. "I got here and they needed someone to authorize the procedure right away and I couldn't reach you and I had a copy of an old draft, from before we finalized things with Mr. Ellison, a version that had my name on it as the primary from an earlier conversation with Mom, before she made the final decision, and I gave it to them because I needed someone to say yes and I didn't think, in the moment, about whether it was the current version. I want to walk you through what that means, because it took me several days afterward, working with an attorney, to fully understand the actual document Raj had produced. There had been, apparently, an early draft in the process of setting up my mother's healthcare directive, a draft prepared before her final conversation with Robert Ellison, in which Raj was tentatively listed as a potential primary agent, a draft my mother had discarded entirely once she made her actual, considered decision to name me instead. Raj had, at some point in the intervening 4 years, kept a copy of that draft. Whether he kept it deliberately, anticipating a moment like this, or whether he kept it accidentally, in an old folder of family paperwork he hadn't cleaned out, is a question I still do not have a fully settled answer to, and I want to be honest with you that this uncertainty is one of the hardest parts of the whole experience, because the two explanations produce very different feelings about what my brother actually is. What I know for certain is that he presented that outdated, superseded, legally invalid draft to Dr. Alvarez as though it were the current authorization, and that the hospital, in the specific urgency of an emergency requiring an immediate decision, accepted it, because there is no reason, in that moment, for a treating physician to assume that a family member handing over a signed document is presenting anything other than the current, valid version of it. Raj authorized the procedure. I want to be fair here and tell you that the procedure itself was, according to Dr. Alvarez, medically appropriate, the correct call given my mother's condition, the same decision I would very likely have made myself if I had been the one standing there. This is not a story about a wrong medical decision made by the wrong person. It is a story about the wrong person having decided it all, about my mother's careful, deliberate 4-year-old designation of who she trusted to speak for her being quietly set aside by someone who had convinced himself, in a moment of panic and perhaps something more complicated than panic, that his own presence in the room and his own love for our mother entitled him to the authority she had specifically chosen not to give him first. Raj, why didn't you wait 6 more minutes and try calling me again? He said, because they said they needed a decision right then, and I was standing there, and I had a piece of paper with my name on it, and it felt easier than saying I don't know, my sister has the real authority and I can't reach her." I said, "Easier for who?" He didn't answer that. I think he understood, in that moment, that there wasn't an answer that made it sound like anything other than what it was, and why Mother came out of sedation roughly 3 hours later. Stable. Alert enough, within another hour, to have a real conversation. I want to tell you about that conversation, because it mattered more than almost anything else in this entire story, and because my mother's response was not what I expected, and taught me something about her that even 4 years of the proxy conversation had not fully prepared me for. It told her what happened. All of it. The missed calls, the outdated document, Raj telling the physician I was unreachable, the procedure authorized under an authority that no longer legally existed. I watched her listen to the entire account without interrupting, her expression moving through something complicated, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, looking at the ceiling of the hospital room, before she said, "Get your brother. I want to talk to both of you together." Raj came in. He would not meet her eyes at first either. My mother said, "Raj, look at me." He did. She said, "I need you to tell me, honestly, why you did what you did, and I need you to not make it sound better than it was, because I will know if you're softening it. And softening it right now will hurt worse than the truth would." He told her essentially what he'd told me. Panic, an old document he'd kept, a decision made in 6 minutes that he had not fully thought through. My mother listened. Then she said something I have thought about every day since. She said, "Raj, I did not choose Priya because I love her more than I love you. I chose her because when I think about the version of myself that might be lying in a bed unable to speak, I trust her to ask what I would want before she acts on what she feels. Today, in the moment that mattered most, you proved exactly why I made that choice. Not because you're a bad son. Because you're a son who acts on what he feels, powerfully and immediately, and that is a beautiful thing in most parts of life. And it is the single most dangerous thing in the one moment where I needed someone to act on what I actually said instead." Raj started crying, in the specific way I have seen him cry perhaps 3 times in his entire adult life, not performative, not loud, just a kind of quiet collapse of composure. He said, "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I thought I was helping. I thought I was being the son who shows up." She said, "You did show up, Raj. You have always shown up. Showing up was never the problem. Listening was the problem, and it has been the problem for longer than today, and I think some part of both of us has known that for years and let it stay quiet because it was easier than saying it out loud. Want to tell you what happened in the days since, because the resolution, like most real resolutions, is not a single clean moment but a series of smaller, harder conversations, and why Mother asked Robert Ellison to draft an addendum to her healthcare directive, not changing the designation, I remain the primary agent, but adding specific language, reviewed and explained carefully by Ellison to both Raj and me together, clarifying that any prior drafts or superseded versions of the document are explicitly void and that hospitals should be instructed to verify the most current version through the attorney's office directly if there is ever any conflict presented at the point of care. It is a small addition, in the language of estate planning, but it is the kind of small addition born entirely out of the specific failure that almost changed the outcome of my mother's care 11 days ago. Raj and I have talked more in the past 11 days than we have in the past several months combined. Not comfortable conversations. He has asked me, several times, whether I can ever fully trust him again in a family emergency, and I have told him honestly that I don't know yet, that trust in this specific context, meaning the context of him standing between me and a decision that affects our mother's body and her wishes, is going to require him doing a different kind of work than showing up with flowers and grand gestures. It's going to require him doing the quieter work our mother described, actually asking her questions, actually listening for the answers, actually holding on to those answers even when they are inconvenient or difficult, rather than substituting his own feelings about what would be best for her actual stated wishes. He's started doing that. In the past week and a half, I have watched him sit with our mother for long stretches, not performing concern in the loud way he used to, but asking her small, specific questions. What music do you actually want played if you're ever in a hospital room again? Do you want visitors in those moments, or do you want quiet? What does comfort actually look like to you, specifically, not what does comfort look like in general? I don't know if this is a permanent change in him or a response to the specific crisis of the last 11 days, and I have told him honestly that I am watching, not with suspicion exactly, but with the specific attentive patience of someone who needs to see a pattern over time rather than take a single good week as proof of anything durable. I want to talk to you directly now, wherever you are, whatever time it is. A healthcare proxy is not a symbolic document. It is not a certificate of who loves someone more. It is a specific, functional designation of whose voice speaks for a person when that person cannot speak for themselves, and the entire value of that designation collapses the moment someone decides that their own presence in a room, or their own love, or their own 6 minutes of panic, entitles them to override a choice that was made carefully, in advance, by the person the document is actually protecting. If you have been named someone's healthcare proxy, or if you have named someone yours, I want to tell you something my mother told me in that hospital room, in the hour after Raj left to get coffee and give us a few minutes alone. She said, "Priya, I need you to promise me something. Not that you'll never be delayed, or unreachable, or human. I need you to promise me that if this ever happens again, you will fight for the paper, not just for the feeling. The document exists because feelings, even loving ones, even well-intentioned ones, are not reliable enough to be trusted with someone's actual body in the actual worst moment of their life. The paper is reliable. The paper says what I actually want, on a day when I could think clearly, before the moment when I couldn't think at all. I have the document with me now, always, in the front pocket of my bag, not because I distrust every hospital I will ever walk into, but because I learned, 11 days ago, exactly how quickly a careful decision made over years can be set aside in the space of 6 minutes by someone who loves the person in that bed enormously, and who still, in that specific moment, chose his own feeling of urgency over her actual documented voice. My mother is recovering well. She came home 4 days ago. She sat at that same laminate kitchen table last night, the table from the original conversation 4 years ago, and she said, watching Raj wash dishes in the next room, "I think something actually changed this time, Priya. I think he heard it." I said, "I hope so, Mom." I said, "I'm watching too." She said, "Good. Watch with me." That is today's story on the Family Ledge. Leave a comment wherever you are watching from. Tell me what time it is, and tell me if you have a healthcare proxy in place for yourself or for someone you love, and if this story just convinced you to actually have that conversation instead of assuming everyone already knows what you'd want. I read every single one. Subscribe for the next story every week. Check the description for another one I think you will connect with. Thank you for being here.